What is the financial state of Delaware? Are your taxes going up? And why don't we use the rainy day fund? We'll talk to the Secretary of Finance. This is the Delaware Way. Welcome to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. So how is the financial health of Delaware? We have with us a man that would know, Secretary of Finance, Rick Geisenberger. Thank you, sir, for coming in. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
So before we start, what exactly do you do? What does the Department of Finance do?
Well, I often like to say that the Secretary of Finance is the chief financial officer of the state. If you don't count the state treasurer, the state auditor, all the school district business managers, and all of the finance people that work throughout the cabinet. But
that's kind of the reason I asked the question, because it seems like there's a lot of people that deal with the budget every year.
There are, and I didn't even mention the budget director and the controller general for the legislature, and there's good reason for all of those financial officers to make sure that there are controls and adequate checks and balances in government, since we're using taxpayer dollars. The Secretary of Finance is in charge of revenue collection, so the Division of Revenue, which collects about 70% of the state's revenue, runs through the Division of Revenue. We run the State Lottery Office, which is the traditional lottery games, as well as video lottery slots, and the regulation of the three racinos. And then we have the
property.
And unclaimed property is in the Secretary's office, and then there's also the Division of Accounting. So all of the state's accounting policies and accounting statements run through the Department of Finance.
Well, that's fascinating. Let me deal with the unclaimed property for a second, because I think people have to make disclosures to you coming up pretty soon, right?
So they're due March 1st each year. For banks, it's actually due November 1st. And
what is the reason for this? This is new, isn't it?
So no, I mean, unclaimed property, which is legally called escheat, is actually something that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, it's the concept that if there's property that's unclaimed, abandoned, eventually it becomes the property of the king to hold in trust for the owners or the heirs of the owners to ultimately claim.
No, I understand
so the idea
that,
of
but the
escheat,
idea of claiming it.
The idea of escheat and the state escheating property has been around for a very long time. The fact that it's become a significant revenue source to Delaware, that is somewhat new. And that really dates back to 1992, when the state of Delaware won a case in the U.S. Supreme Court called Delaware versus New York, which essentially said that where you have property that is abandoned and held by a holder that's incorporated in the state of Delaware, and the property can't be found, the property holder can't be found in the other 49 states, or they're a foreign, they're not a U.S. national, that property ultimately should be escheated to the state of Delaware and held by the state of Delaware to be claimed by those parties down the road. So right now, the state of Delaware last year reported about $554 million of general fund revenue, and there were about $105 million of that was claimed. All
of this goes to a conversation I had with the governor when he was talking about the fact that we have to get more sustainable sources of income. That at this point, some of the things like unclaimed property and even taxes, you can't depend on on all of this, and the franchise and the fees for franchising. You can't depend on them. That we need to have more sustainable sources of income. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the state's revenue sources, certain ones grow with the economy, but many of them do not. So the state, when we have a DFAC meeting, we project about 23 different sources of revenue at DFAC. Only 4 of those actually grow with our economy. Personal income tax, corporate franchise tax, although that has a maximum cap, so it tends to need to be reset every 6 to 14 years. Then you've got the real estate transfer tax, which grows with the economy, but in a very choppy and volatile way. And the gross receipts tax. Our other sources of revenue, the bank franchise tax, the unclaimed property, lottery revenues, and keep going down that list, are very volatile revenue sources, corporate income tax, and have been shrinking, not growing. So that creates a big challenge for us when you've got 60% of your revenue portfolio growing with the general economy, somewhere between 2.5% and 3.5% a year, but then you've got the other 40% of your portfolio flat to shrinking each year.
We had, was it a $400 million shortfall in the budget last year?
$400 million shortfall that we had to address, yes.
You had to address. And I just read an article saying that there's a $200 million rainy day fund?
There's about, a little bit large, about $235 million.
And that, how long since we've touched that?
Rainy day fund has never been touched. I mean, the rainy day fund statutorily is, actually under our Constitution, needs to be 5% of our projected revenue. And the problem with using the rainy day fund, it's a great fund for a true hurricane kind of disaster where you know that if you spent the money, you'd be reimbursed by the federal government within a few months and you'd be able to fully restore the rainy day fund. But as a fund to actually handle recessionary scenarios, the actual language of the statute, of the Constitution, makes it pretty difficult to actually use because it's supposed to be used for an unanticipated deficit. Well, we project our revenues 6 times throughout the year. There hardly is any such thing as an unanticipated deficit, other than for a true hurricane or tornado or some natural disaster that struck the state. So you probably know that there's a group that's been formed by resolution of the General Assembly signed by the governor that's looking at, should we make adjustments to our rainy day fund? Should we boost the amount in the rainy day fund during good times, maybe build a reserve not at 5%, but grow to 6, 7, maybe even 10% during good times, so that we actually could spend it down during these more challenging times when the economy is in a recession or only growing 1% a year.
Well, let's continue and pick up on that point when we come back. We will be right back with Secretary of Finance Rick Geisenberger when the Delaware Way continues.